In this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about equivalent fractions and finding equivalent fractions so that you can compare and order fractions. So in our video about comparing and ordering fractions, we learned some different strategies about how you can compare and order them. We're going to add to that in this one. And this will also come in handy for adding and subtracting fractions later on. So we're going to start with the fractions 1/4 and 2/3, and we want to find equivalent fractions of 1/4 and 2/3 that will have the same denominator so that we can compare and order the fractions later on. So let's start with 1/4, and we're going to look over here on our chart, and I've got 1/4 right here, and then I'm going to find 2/3 on my chart, and I've got 2/3 right there. So we need to look and find fractions where both 1/4 and 2/3 have equivalent fractions that have the same denominator. So as we go out, we have 2/3 is the same as 4/6, and 1/4 is 2/8. So 6 and 8 are not the same. So we have to go to the next one. We've got 6/9 and 3/12. Those are not the same. So we go out here to 8/12 and 4/16. Those are not the same. But if we look at here, we've got a 12, and here we've got a 12. So these are the equivalent fractions that we want to use to determine which of these fractions is bigger, 1/4 or 2/3. So 1/4 is equal to 3/12, and 2/3 is equal to 8/12. So now that we have common denominators, we're able to see which fraction is bigger. So 8/12 is bigger than 3/12, so that means 2/3 is greater than 1/4. So if we're going to write that, we could write 2/3 is greater than 1/4. Now you might not like finding equivalent fractions with this chart, but it is there as a tool for you to use in case you get stuck finding equivalent fractions using a different strategy. Another strategy to use to help you find equivalent fractions so that you can compare and order fractions is using this fraction stick chart that we used in the other video. This is very similar to the chart that we just showed, the equivalent fractions chart. And the process is pretty much exactly the same. You're going to look for equivalent fractions for 1/4 and 2/3 that share a common denominator. So if we're using this, we'd come out to our 1/4 mark, which is right here. So 1/4 is equivalent to 1/8, which is equivalent to 1/12, which is equivalent to, let me start over. 1/4 is equivalent to 2/8, which is the equivalent to 3/12 and to 4/16. So those are the equivalent fractions to 1/4 on the fraction stick chart. Then we're going to come back over here, and we have to remember those numbers. So 2/3, we're going to find 2/3. Here's 1/3. Here's 2/3. So if we come to the end of the 2/3 mark, we've got 2/3, 4/6, and none of those are equivalent denominators. We have 6/9. We have 8/12. So of those, again, remember we've got 12s here for 2/3, and we've got 12s here for 1/4. So that means our equivalent fractions can be 3/12 and 8/12, and then 8/12 is bigger than 3/12. So you can use the fraction stick chart as well. Okay, here's the last strategy I'm going to show you for renaming fractions as equivalent fractions so that you can compare and order fractions. And we're just going to stick with the same numbers here, 1/4 and 2/3. We use the fraction stick chart, we use the equivalent fractions chart. Now we're going to use the multiplication rule. We've talked about this before in the past, when you're finding equivalent fractions, you multiply or divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number, and that will give you an equivalent fraction. In this case, when we're comparing fractions or when we're going to add or subtract fractions, our denominators have to be the same. So the quickest way to do that, and it's actually called the quick common denominator, is to multiply the denominators together. On the other two examples, you might have been thinking, well, 4 times 3 is 12, and we're getting 12 both times, and that's what it is. You take the denominator of one fraction and the denominator of the other fraction, and you multiply those together. So 4 times 3 is 12. So that's going to give us a common denominator of 12. Now, how do we figure out the numerator? Well, like we said earlier, multiply or divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So for this one, we have to think, what times 4 equals 12? Well, 4 times 3 equals 12, and we're just getting this denominator from down here. So we don't really even have to think about it because our answer is just down here. Then up at the top, 1 times 3, we have to do the same number, is 3. So 1/4 equals 3/12. Same thing down here. We're just going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator of 2/3 by the denominator of 1/4. So it's going to be 3 times 4 is 12, and 2 times 4 is 8. So just like the other ones, 8/12 is bigger than 3/12. So those are some different ways that you can find equivalent fractions to compare fractions with the same denominator. If you have any questions on it, make sure that you ask Mr. Brandt, and he will help you out when he is available.